The journey of caring for a loved one who is living with dementia can be quite challenging. The aim of this podcast is to make caregiving less daunting and more fulfilling. On this platform, we share knowledge, understanding, and experiences. We enlighten, give hope, and encourage, and in the process, create positive awareness about different aspects of dementia. Welcome to my podcast, Dementia Caregivers Corner. My name is Julia Ratladi. Dementia Care, how deep is your love?
Most families don't fully understand dementia or the intensity of caring for a loved one living with it until it hits home. Our guest is no exception. When both her parents were diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, she realized how little she truly knew about dementia. As a filmmaker searching for answers, she found a gap. There weren't enough films capturing the lived experience of families like hers. So, with her parents' permission, she turned the cameras on their journey, creating a powerful series of films that combine personal moments and expert insights. In today's episode, I'm joined by the lady of the moment herself, Kimberley Littlemore, an award-winning documentary filmmaker with years of experience telling real-life stories for BBC television. We'll talk about her parents' journey, what she learned as both a daughter and a filmmaker, and how lived experience films can help raise awareness and reduce stigma around dementia. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome in today's episode none other than Kimberley.
Wow, that was a nice introduction.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes, it is. Because that's who you are. That's what you stand for. Let's just get into it, Kimberley. I watched this film called Still Alice. It's a film that is based on a university professor who was diagnosed with early onset dementia. And there's this scene that really stuck in my mind that I can remember vividly, where she sat her family down to share with them the news of her diagnosis. You see, in that room, Kim, the emotions were all over. There was anger, there was confusion, there were tears. It was, all the emotions that were heartbreaking. So I want to take you back to your own family. What is it that made you want to take your parents for testing? Were they exhibiting some form of symptoms or signs of dementia that concerned you as a family? And you thought, no, maybe they need a diagnosis. Maybe they need to be taken for a memory care.
I think that what we experience might be similar to what many do. And I talk about dementia. It doesn't get delivered like a FedEx parcel. And one moment you wake up and go, oh, we need to get a test. Oh, gosh, look, we've got dementia in the home. What happens is it sneaks up on you over, well, depends on your personal experience, of course, but it can just sneak up on you over years. So like many people now, I sit down with my friends and say, oh, do you remember when my mum did X, Y, and Z? And now I say, do you know what? I think that might have been the beginning of her dementia journey. Or do you remember when my dad, he was so odd at such and such, or he said this, or he did that? And I think, gosh, do you know what? I think that might have been the beginning of his dementia journey, because it comes and goes. And one of the professors I worked with said, dementia is a bit like the tide going out. The water comes up and it goes back down, comes back up and it goes back down. But each time, or maybe the second and third time it comes up, it goes down a little less, comes up a little less far. So it's like a tide going out. So you describe that scene, you know what, I never watch any of those films. I know they're really brilliant, but I find them so terribly traumatizing. If I go to the cinema, I want to watch something that's going to make me laugh. I'm certainly going to watch something that makes me bawl my eyes out and feel even more scared than I do already that one day I might get dementia. I try and avoid things like that. Funnily enough, I spoke to one of my kids the other day. We were walking along the beach and I said to them, look, if I think I'm getting dementia and you think I am, because I'm doing things, like those early things, people are noticing, that's a bit odd. I said, let's just be really open and honest about them. And let's not make it into this big thing like, can we tell mum we think she's got dementia? So can we just kind of just deal with it? Because nobody will know more than I. But then I don't think my parents had any clue that what they were experiencing was dementia, because we're talking now, what is it, pre-pandemic. Now everybody's talking about dementia. I work with dementia, on the topic of dementia every day, it seems. But back then, never even crossed my mind. So for most people living their busy lives, I don't think necessarily, well, certainly back then, dementia was just not the forefront of my mind. They do something a bit mad and I think, oh, they're just old.
Yes.
Lovely, idiosyncratic, old. For donkey's years, people have thought that about their elderly relatives who went, showed certain behaviours. They think, oh, well, that's just grandma or just granddad, or that's just my husband or whatever it is. Yeah. So obviously we now want to label everything. We want to call everybody, tell everyone they've got a disease. So we never had that moment. All I did was eventually say, gosh, I've heard that maybe we could have a brain scan. I think my mum and dad went and did that on their own, actually. I don't even remember frog marching them anywhere to do it. I think it sort of just happened. It was very uneventful, that whole beginning bit. Whereas I fear now that people know so much more about it. I bet there's quite a lot of people frog marched for tests because somebody needs to know something. But even if you know it, so what? What are you going to do?
I think you share the same sentiments with one CEO. Actually, not that. I think it's my lecturer, one of my lecturers, when I was asking her about the importance of diagnosis. And she said to me, Julia, what's the point? After knowing what you do, I think you share the same sentiments with her.
The only reason to know officially is to access services. And I've been working with a fantastic team at Gloucestershire Integrated Care Board and the University of Gloucestershire. And I've seen the way the dementia strategy for the ICB in Gloucestershire. And they have, if you get a diagnosis, then you become part of their service provision. And so you can access this, you can access that, you can learn about this, you can learn about that. And as time moves on and you need help perhaps with funding for direct payments, as they are in Wales, they're called something different in England. But you need a diagnosis to access that kind of thing. So there becomes a sort of functional reason for it. But in the beginning, when you're not really certain, I'd say sticking it to the back of your mind and living the best life you can until you need to be able to access services or help or whatever is, I don't know, that's what I'm going to do. Every time I think, oh, crikey, that's the beginning of me, I think, right, what can I go and do now to distract myself from that very thought?
Something will come up. I was talking to Lynette Lee. Lynette Lee is here in the UK. She authored a book called Sleeping Aware: When Mums Battle with Alzheimer's, because her dad lived with Alzheimer's. And she shared how they were relieved as a family when the dad was diagnosed, because they didn't know what was wrong with their dad. They didn't know what dementia was, just like many families, you see. So going forward, you are a contributor of this lovely book that I have here called A New Approach to Dementia, Examining Sensory and Perceptual Impairment, which really highlights how dementia is not just about memory loss. There are some sensory impairment that to be talked about that is not discussed much in the dementia mainstream. What was your specific contribution towards that? And how do you relate it with your parents' journey of living with dementia? What is it that you wanted the world to know when you agreed to be part of the project?
Well, I have become very interested in this whole sensory question because I think I had a unique perspective on dementia by having two parents living with it at the same time. So I could see how different they were, because obviously the mantra is when you get to know someone with dementia, you only know one person with dementia.
Yes.
But I found that became to be used as a bit of a stick to beat me with, because they just keep saying, yes, well, of course, everyone's different. You go, well, yes, but so what? What are we going to do with this knowledge that everyone's different? And I joined groups. There's a fantastic group in Swansea University led by Professor Andrea Tales and Dr. Emma Richards. They brought this brilliant team of people together, all doing research into sensory changes with dementia. And so I would sit sort of monthly or however often we had these meetings, learning and listening to what people were thinking and discovering, and the papers they were publishing that was showing all these different sensory impacts. And I was thinking, gosh, yes, my dad was really sensitive to sound. My mum loved reading, but was really struggling to read. And I started to sort of realize, my mum would fall over, but my dad didn't fall, but then he had trouble with something else. So I was thinking, gosh, yes, of course. So everybody who experiences dementia has different sensory impacts. So my passion and my interest in that book was, or what I was asked to do is contribute, obviously not the academic research, because I'm not an academic researcher, but my practical experience with a mind to what and an understanding of and a recognition of the work that was being done in academia. And when I made the films, right in the beginning, I was invited to go and see an academic who said to me, what is it that you're working on at the moment? What are you interested in? And I said, what I'm really interested in is how people with dementia see the world. So I worked then with the Assistive Technologies Innovation Centre, which is part of University of Wales, Trinity St David, both very long names. But they said, well, look, we've got these eye tracking glasses. Maybe you could put these eye tracking glasses on your parents and we can have a go. And I said, oh gosh, yes, okay. Well, look, they said, look, we'll come and do a day with the glasses if you pay for the cameraman. And I thought, so this was the beginning of my whole filming journey. And I thought, well, why not? Because I wanted to film them and I wanted to try and see what we could find out. So I thought, well, let's go for it. So we sort of said, well, what are we going to film? And I'm like, I don't know. Well, I said, well, look, the two things Dad can't do now, he's told me that he's struggling to make a cup of tea and he's told me he's struggling to dress. So it was all a bit awkward. I was just like, oh my goodness, am I really going to do this? But anyway, we did it. And I said to Mum and Dad, what do you think? And my mum and dad are brilliant. My dad always made films. His house was full of cine cameras and video cameras. And he'd always made films ever since we were little. And, my brother and I made this lovely film once about Mother's Day. We made a little sweet little film. We had lots of fun together doing that kind of thing. And so they were so proud of all the work I was doing at the BBC. And so they said, oh, okay, then all right. And my mum loved being on camera. She loved acting and presenting and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, we arrived, we put these glasses on, we filmed them. Dad could see us. And every time he looked anywhere, you could see what he was seeing. And that was being recorded too. And we had this extraordinary thing where he made a cup of tea on a very cluttered work surface and he was really struggling. And you could see that his eyes were being pulled all over the place by all these coloured pots. And then the moment where the postman catches his eye through the window and he looks up at the postman and you could just see all this information pouring into Dad's eyes that he couldn't process and he was struggling to process. So I'd read that if you declutter, it can make it easier. So we thought, okay, let's try. So we took everything away and we just had the tea caddy, 2 mugs and the kettle. And we were doing really, really well. And Dad was going, oh, yeah, this is easy. It's great. My dad's just lovely, lovely personality. He's gorgeous. He's doing this thing. So he puts the tea bag in the 2 cups. So he had 1 cup one side of the tea caddy, 1 cup the other side of the tea caddy, and the tea caddy full of tea bags in the middle. So he poured the water in and he poured it into the first cup brilliantly. And then he went to the second one, which was the round white tea caddy, looked to all intents and purposes the same shape and size as the mug. And he filled the tea caddy up with boiling water. So now he's got the tea caddy full of tea bags and boiling water. And he thinks he's done it now. And I say to Daddy, Dad, look. And he looks and he still can't see. The processing it's just not working. And then he suddenly gets what he's done and he laughs at himself. And then we went upstairs. I picked out a shirt, which is my mum's favourite shirt. She absolutely loved him in this shirt. And it sounds awful, but it was a purple check shirt or sort of maroon check shirt. 2 colours of this maroon, one dark, one lighter. So I handed it to Dad. And they had this very patterned bedspread and they had this very finely checked shirt. So he's looking at this checked shirt against the background of the patterned bedspread. And he's like, he doesn't know what to do with it. And I said, Dad, what are you seeing? And he says, I don't know. He said, lots of little squares. And you realise that he can't find the arm. He can't find the collar. And again, you can now, if you try and see it through his eyes as you can in the film, all you can see that he's just getting all these shapes and patterns and he can't find the edge. So I then say, okay, and it's just luck that I happened to pick out a check one. Anyway, so then I picked out a white shirt. He just put it straight on and I say, you've probably seen it on the film. And he goes, oh, it just flowed. Now, those 2 things then I sent, because I'd been going to these groups with Professor Andrea Tales. I sent those 2 films to Andrea and I said, look what we've found. And she went, wow. She said, I've been researching this for donkey's years. This is my specialist passion. And you've captured it in a way that is so helpful to share her academic work. I wouldn't have done it without having talked to her first, if you can, so her academia, my then trying to capture something, happily those two things happened. So all sort of came together. And that was the beginning of the journey of filming it. And that's effectively what I do in the book. I bring that lived experience to the academic research. And and that's what I've tried to do ever since, is how, and Professor Tales is brilliant at this. She shares her learning in a brilliant way with people like me who want to make a practical application, and everybody wins.
Yes.
We had a 2-page feature article in the Lancet Neurology, which they interviewed her and they interviewed Dr. Sean Jenkins from Assistive Technologies Innovation Centre. So everybody then gets to demonstrate the brilliance that they bring to the party, if you like.
Yes.
That was a very long answer to a very short question.
Yes, but it was a necessary answer. But what you are describing, when you are describing it, I am in the head of someone who is living with dementia, and I am feeling their struggle, and that's what breaks me. And there are people out there who have no idea of what to do in situations like that. That's what pains me in a way.
And that's why I wanted to make the film. So we show those instances, and then we've got, Professor Tales then says visual processing, edge perception. And so if you're a carer, I'm hoping, well, that's what people write to me and tell me. They say, I get it now. I feel more confident to know what to do. So if you're going to go into a cafe, think about the levels of noise. Think about if there's check tablecloths on the table. Think about where the person's looking or sitting. It arms you basically to help you face the world a little bit. So, if you're going to put the television on, put the subtitles on, maybe turn the volume down if somebody's sensitive to sound. There's little things that once you become aware, once you start thinking like somebody who might have, it's like a waterfall pouring into your eyes. You want to turn that down to a little spray so that you can deal with it, not be overwhelmed through your senses. And that's why I'm now trying to develop, well, I'm getting there slowly with the support of the Alzheimer's Society, to develop a sensory assessment tool so that carers can learn, sit down, work through scenarios in the day so that people can start to see where the pinch points are, where the challenges are, and then what innovations are out there. There's this fantastic thing called, I think it's called the Tasty Spoon, but there's a guy up in Sheffield University. So a lot of people with dementia will start eventually along their journey. Many people will start to lose or their taste will change. So they'll become, perhaps things might taste more bitter. So one of the dementia trainers I was working with explains that something like tea, it'll start to taste more bitter. So you'll want to add sugar, even if you've never normally had sugar in your tea. You might start thinking, right, actually, I want this sweeter. And then some people lose some of the taste receptors. So this guy up in Sheffield, who also works with the Alzheimer's Society, he's developing the Tasty Spoon. And when you put the spoon on your tongue, it stimulates different parts of your tongue. I can't say any more than that because I'll probably say it wrong. But anyway, there's innovations like that are coming that I want people to know about. So if somebody's finding their food bland and isn't interested in their food, maybe the Tasty Spoon might be the solution for them. But you don't want to buy the Tasty Spoon for everyone because they won't all need it, So it's about, if you've got limited money to spend, as most of us are limited by money, you don't want to do what I did, which was buy things that had dementia in the title and then find they're absolutely no use. Because I ended up with a whole room full of things I bought because they were dementia telephones, dementia this, dementia that, but they didn't work always.
I know. I actually shared that with Professor Tales because I had her on my podcast as well, that I supported one family. They would buy each and everything that they hear that is dementia related. And so at the end of the day, they feel like they've lost money because they are not getting what they thought they will get out of those tools or whatever you want to call them. So yes, those things that you think they are little, they add to the perception of somebody who is living with dementia. The same lady that I supported, we went into town in Marks and Spencer, a restaurant, and there was one lady seated behind us. And she was talking loud on the phone. You see, the lady that I supported who lived with dementia just got irritated, for a lack of a better word, and just shouted. Fortunately, I always carry the placard with me when I'm going with her. And I just showed, when we are settled, I showed the lady that, no, I'm living with dementia. But the point is, she was the noise, the sensitivity to noise. Yes, and I'm glad you are working on those perceptual changes, Kimberley. I love talking about this. But then again, I feel like somebody will learn a lot from it. At the same time, it pains me because I understand dementia. It pains me that there are many people who have no clue or how to care for their loved ones living with dementia. Going forward, I want to talk about you worked for the BBC, you traveled, worked with talented people around the world. You capturing filming, working as a filmmaker. Just last week, I think you were or 2 weeks back, you were in South Africa. You are a traveler lady. So I want to know, how is it different telling your parents' story compared to all these films that you have shot or worked on for BBC? Not just a story about a progressive illness. How is it different?
Is it different? Because I've shared people's stories about cancer. I've shared people's stories about all sorts of things, and they're just a slice of our lives. In South Africa, I was at the International Federation of Aging conference, meeting people who, like me, are very focused on this stage. And one guy presented the story of an artist who developed dementia and kept painting, and then he showed how the paintings sort of changed, and eventually he was a portraitist and he could only draw this sort of smudge in the end. And this guy was saying it's so tragic that dementia robbed him of his artistic talent. And I sort of stood up at the end and I said, look, yes, but all the art that he did before wasn't gone. We still got it. This guy had 60, 70 years of a fantastic life contributing stunning art to the world. And even in his dementia journey, represented his journey and has taught us. And we're sitting here talking about and looking at the things he painted then that revealed something of what he was going through. And it may not have been great, but he still communicated and he still contributed something quite powerful and profound. And I think it's sort of remembering that a cancer diagnosis doesn't take away the life that a person has had or will have. And similarly, dementia. And I'm trying in my own mind, because obviously with 2 parents with dementia, I'm mindful that this could visit my life. I don't want to be defined either by my fear of dementia or even a diagnosis of it, because everything I'll have done before still stands. So I don't think these films should be, and if anybody watches these films, I'm sure you'll tell everyone where we find them and all this kind of stuff, but quite a few of them make you laugh. You can still live with dementia. I remember a lady friend, one of my mum's friends, I was in church and she came up and she said, oh my goodness, Kimberley, I've been diagnosed with dementia. And I said how sorry I was and everything. And she said, that's it, isn't it? And I said, what do you mean that's it? Because I had years with my mum and dad where we still went down the beach and we still went to the park and we still went out for coffee and we even went on a little holiday and, we still lived. It doesn't stop. I mean, of course, at the end, it's not brilliant, but my mum could still hug me till she died, and my dad. So, it's just part of our, and so many people, it's going to visit so many people's lives. I think if we build it up, it's a bit, I mean, I know it's a terrible thing. Well, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing to say, but when I was in the 80s, when I was going off to university, there was the HIV/AIDS was everywhere. And the fear, I remember the fear. And in a way, the way people talk about dementia now, it's like this huge, terrible fear, but you kind of have to live with these things and they don't define us. They're something that happens. I'm not comparing the two things, but I do think sometimes the degree of fear that can be drummed up about dementia and as you say, stigma and thinking it's some sort of awful thing is most unfortunate. So we need to kind of recast it as being something that, you hear about people trying to have dementia-friendly communities. And that's what we all need to create more loving, warm environments where people with dementia can exist. There's a lady on my road who lives with dementia. I found her in my shed in the back of my house the other day. We had the most surreal conversation, but because I know about dementia, I was able to have a lovely chat with her and she went off very happy, whereas somebody else maybe who didn't know might have been unpleasant for them both. So if we can all learn and understand and not see dementia as a threat, but as a part of the aging process, then maybe we can all live together more comfortably.
Yes, I can tell that you are from the living well dementia pro. And I love that. Let's take out the fear and people enjoy what they have left. When I was reading your profile, I mentioned that you said you were searching for information and you realized that there are no films to teach you more on dementia. What is it that you were missing? What did you thought that was not there?
I wanted to see what it looked like. So all I could find was training materials, and I went on courses, and it would be a person who wasn't living with dementia, sort of miming or acting what it might be like or what the symptoms might be like. And I thought, okay, well, this is all right, but I'm not really understanding. I'm not seeing it. And then I saw some sort of little animations or recreations of people, again with actors, that showed how people with Alzheimer's disease might see black things or puddles as holes. And they were all quite scary. It was always ramping up the horror of not being able to do things and seeing the world as full of holes, and, or it was interviews with people with early onset dementia, sort of sitting, talking, describing things. But again, they had early onset. So again, they have different parts of dementia are quite different. So it was people talking very early when they could also be very reflective and very aware. And so I was just thinking, well, none of these things I was looking at correlated with what I was experiencing. So I just thought, and then, now people ring me all the time and say, Kim, what do I do now? Kim, this has happened. This has happened. What do I do? What do I do? So, I knew that there was a space, or I guessed that there would be a space for people to. So when I showed things that happened to my parents, I knew that because everyone's different, that my parents' experiences were very unique to them. But I would always be asking the professionals, well, look, in situations like this, if somebody is up at night, what kind of things can you do? Not necessarily this in this particular instance, but generally. So I was always trying to generalize. And I've done the same with the Gloucestershire Integrated Care Board and University of Gloucestershire. We've filmed in a dementia care home for a month and in some extra care housing in the Forest of Dean. And we filmed people living with dementia. And I like to think I've done it in a very similar way to my own parents. Because you said, is it the same when it's your parents? I feel as responsible to the people I filmed as I did to my own mum and dad.
Right.
And I also filmed in Red Sea House, a sheltered housing for Somali elders. And, wherever I filmed, I've always treated them exactly the same way as I treated my mum and dad, or tried to look after them in the same way. And these films, the residential care films, they're in production now and they're slowly emerging from the edit. But soon they'll be also on the website with my parents' friends so that people can access them. And they are designed to support people who are thinking of a career in residential care or working in care and wanting some more understanding and knowledge about dementia. So I'm working on a film at the moment about, when you go into a dining room and you look around the room. So I've got footage, I've got yards and yards and yards of footage of people in the dining room in the care home. And it's amazing what you see when you look. And it's basically trying to say, right, if you're working in a dining room and you're looking after, say, 10 people, maybe more, what are you looking out for? What can you be doing to make sure that the person eats and feels dignified and hasn't got too much cutlery, or what's, depending on what stage they're at. So I'm trying to give people really practical tools that they can do the best job they can, because otherwise I don't know where you'd start.
And you're doing a great job. I'm saying this because I've watched some of the films, and as somebody from outside, they were hilarious. I don't want to lie, but I didn't know the best way to react when I'm talking to you. Because
no, you've got to laugh, because that's how
parents
people. Yeah, you don't learn by being bored to death, do you? You learn by being engaged and being able to think, oh, this could be me. So when they see me stomping around at 1 o'clock in the morning, shouting at my dad in my dressing gown because he's woken me up yet again for something that isn't real, you're just like, well, if people will see that, they'll know that it's sometimes okay to just find things hard, because it is hard. It's not a picnic, but everyone's human. But it gives you strategies. That's what I just want. Give people strategies, give people confidence so that they feel, because if you're highly stressed, I've been doing all these funding application forms, and if you're really stressed and you feel out of control, you're more likely to end up presenting in the emergency room. You're more likely to go into crisis. You're more likely to have negative mental health effects. Whereas if you feel more confident, you feel more in control, you're going to have a better chance.
Definitely.
Of doing a good job for yourself and the person living with dementia who's alongside you, because you kind of, it's a huge responsibility.
It is. The films that I enjoyed were okay, not enjoyed as such, but there was one where they mistook a toilet brush for a kitchen brush, and there was one where your mom phoned you at around 2 a.m. like to say your dad is trying to kill her. And there was the coffee one where she was making coffee for the husband and they kept on putting in sugar, coffee. Really
Tea
hilarious,
a
Mom.
lot. And it's just like, I know, you just go, really? And you'd never know. I mean, if I hadn't filmed like this, you'd never know.
Exactly. But the question that I want to ask you is, were there any films or maybe the footage that you've seen that maybe looked too embarrassing to share with the public because these were your parents and you thought maybe I don't want to share this one, but later on maybe realized that, this is for dementia awareness. I'm going to share this. Do you have such?
No, to be fair, there weren't. And I don't think, and similarly, I've just watched all this footage in the care homes and in somebody's flat in the sheltered accommodation, and I've never seen anything terrible. I mean, obviously, I was very at pains to put, I didn't want to show anybody naked or undignified. I was very careful with that. Yes. But no, they never did anything really embarrassing or awful. I mean, no. And
Yes.
I'm comforted by that because, you sort of wonder, because I always wonder whether it might be a bit like when you're completely drunk. Not that I do that very often, obviously. But if one is completely drunk and then you maybe can't remember things terribly well, you wake up the next morning and think, oh my goodness, what did I do? How awful. And I can only imagine that if I get dementia, it might feel like that, where I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what did I do? What did I say? But you don't actually, you're still yourself, So if you're a nice human being, you're mostly going to be, even when your brain is not working as it did, I think you'll still be fundamentally a nice human being. You might lose the plot every now and then. Maybe your frontal lobe is not protecting you quite as well. Maybe you're not quite as inhibited as you should be or could be, but you're not going to do anything.
Oh, yes.
Well, anyway, that was my experience. I'm sure other people have had other experiences, perhaps where people's personalities do change dramatically and they find that very difficult. And that must be awfully hard. But it wasn't something that I experienced, for which I am frankly grateful.
Yes, thank God for that. My last question. I don't know how much you know about the landscape of dementia awareness in Africa. We associate dementia with witchcraft. We associate dementia with madness, any other thing except to call it dementia. We don't even have the equivalent of the word dementia where I'm coming from. So I'm trying to create awareness in that regard. I'm writing my book now, which I hope to translate or maybe adapt into a film or something in my efforts to raise awareness about dementia in Africa, in addition to this podcast. So I'm wondering, this is personal, which one would work better for me in addition to the efforts that I'm making? Should I look at documentaries as like small films like the ones that you produced, or just a long film that I said I watched about somebody living with dementia? Looking at the settings in Africa.
When I was down in South Africa, I met some people working in the Northern Cape who provide older people services. And I told them about the films that I'd made and that they were short films. And they were really, really interested and keen to have access to them. And as soon as they're all finished, I will share them with them. And I've told them about the ones that exist already. And I personally believe that it depends what you're making. If you want to make films that people can use to learn and train, I think a 5 to 10 minute film on a topic, focused, considered, is a good way to get information over. Because whenever you're making films, there's such a difference between a 10-minute film, a 30-minute film, a 60-minute film, in the pacing, in the style of it. Thinking back to my days as a documentary maker, it depends what time people are going to watch it. So I think people now very much are used to bite-sized content. And also some people like film, some people like written things. So if you can have a nice mix of media, like you might have a short film, then you might have some notes, you might have some images, you can actually mix and match so people can use the best way that they find to learn, to absorb the information.
Thank you very much. So what are you working on right now?
So I'm working on 2 things. I'm working on finishing my 10 films about carers working in residential settings with Gloucestershire Integrated Care Board and the University of Gloucestershire. Nearly finished. And when those 10 films are finished, they will sit alongside the 10 films I made with my parents on pocketmedic.org/dementia. So you can go in there and find those. I'm working with the Alzheimer's Society in the UK to develop the sensory assessment tool. And I'm just in conversation about funding with different governments, organisations, funders. And if I can get that funding, then I will be developing that over the next year.
Right.
And it's called KIM, K-I-M, the sensory assessment tool. And Kim in that context obviously is me, Kim.
Yes.
And it's also knowledge is meaning or know I matter. So what I'm trying to do is find a way that I can share my filmmaking or the films that I've made, harness the genius of Professor Andrea Tales and her colleagues to help develop the assessment and work with people living with dementia and their carers to review products so that we have, I like to call it sort of some combination. Imagine a mix of Gogglebox meets Which magazine, so that when we actually talk about these different products, you've got people like you and me looking at them. How do we get the batteries in? You know, do they work? Does this look like something you could find helpful? Have you liked this at home? Why did it work for you? When did it work for you? So we actually get something really tangible and then perhaps purchase these products through the Alzheimer Society shop, for example, and other trusted suppliers so that people feel they're going somewhere where people know what they're talking about. So I'm trying to find a place, a home base for carers that they can go to, find out what's going on, what's going to work, understand what they need to be thinking about and looking for, to provide a sort of solid foot. Ultimately, I want to be like a dementia influencer and then translate it into all different languages so that wherever you are in the world, if you're experiencing dementia, you've got somewhere to turn.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks, Kimberley, for sharing your story with us and for the important work that you have done in helping families understand the lived experience of dementia through your films. To our listeners, I hope this conversation has given you both the insight and encouragement. If you'd like to learn more about Kimberley's work and watch her films, you can find the links in the episode description. As always, please share this episode with your community to help raise awareness about dementia-related issues. Until we meet next time, bye for now. Ta-da! Dementia Care. How deep is your love?